Hello everybody and welcome. I'm Terry Ryder, founder of hotspotting.com.au, and today I'm speaking about one of Australia's most important and most vibrant regional cities, Albury Wodonga. One of the realities that has emerged during the COVID-19 period is that many regional areas of Australia have been much less impacted than some of our bigger cities. Not only have regional areas had much fewer cases of the virus, and many regional towns have had no cases at all, the regional centres with strong and diverse economies have been able to deal rather well with this difficult period in the life of Australia. There are also places where the bans on auctions and open houses have had little impact because those methods are not particularly prevalent in regional centres, unlike the big cities like Melbourne and Sydney. So all this brings greater focus to regional centres like Albury Wodonga, where economic diversity and strength is a major bonus, prices are much lower, and rental yields are much higher than the biggest cities. My special guests today are Peter Drummond from Drummond Real Estate in Albury, and two of his key team members, Ryder and Josh Kibble. So welcome, gentlemen. Hope you're all going well today.
Thanks, Terry.
Terry.
So Peter, I know you love Albury Wodonga at any time, but right now you must give thanks that you live and have a real estate business in such a place.
We've been blessed, Terry. Albury Wodonga has been fantastic. We've had 4 or 5 inches of rain in the last week, which has also helped. I went for a bike ride yesterday and the snow was sitting on the mountains, so that was pretty good. I believe it's 3 or 4 weeks since we've had any new cases of COVID-19. So one of the really good things from a health and a well-being point of view is being in Albury Wodonga. That said, I think it's fair to say our market's been surprisingly buoyant, and I'm sure Josh and Rion will confirm that. And in fact, I think I was in the office this morning. Josh, you might confirm that. Lisa Jane said that, or LJ said that there'd been 100 and something inquiries. Was it over the weekend or last week?
That was over last week, but it's gradually up and up each week at the moment, which is promising to see.
That sounds like a very healthy rate of inquiry. One of the messages that I've been getting from real estate people around the country is that some of them, at least, they kind of like this period because the tire kickers are gone from the industry and the inquiries they're getting is genuine inquiry, and they're actually still doing pretty good business, good sales at good prices. Are you finding the same thing in your market?
Probably you, Rion, that could make comment about that.
Yeah, I would agree, Terry. I think that's pretty spot on. We've generally been pretty good inquiry-wise, but over the last couple of weeks that's changed a little bit, but we are probably seeing a much better quality over quantity, which at the end of the day, that's what we're after. So, it has weeded out a few of the professional lookers, if you like.
So typically, where does your inquiry come from? Is it mostly local, or do you get a strong element of people from outside there thinking of moving there, investors looking at buying there? And has it changed much in the current climate?
You make comment, boys.
You go, Ryan.
I'll fill this one, Josh. Look, we do see probably still the majority people from around the area staying within the area because of our pretty good size population-wise. There's a lot of moving and shaking and people sticking around. That being said, probably our biggest number of external inquiries are mostly investment-based. As you mentioned off the top, returns are good, prices are down. There's a high demand for rentals as well within the community. So it's a good mixture. The diversity of the economy here as well sees a lot of people moving to the area. So we get a portion of that. That's more seasonal, sort of towards the end of the year that picks up. But it's a broad sort of mix across the board.
Yeah. So one of the things that's always stood out for me as being a key to the success of Albury Wodonga is a very strategic location, a certain distance from Melbourne, a certain distance from Canberra and from Sydney. And that strategic location means there's some very, very big companies, both international and national companies that have a presence there, a very big presence. And that's one of the keys, I think, to the success of the economy and therefore the real estate market in Albury Wodonga.
That's fair too. Very fair, Terry. What I would say, just to not misconstrue what Rion said before, he said things are down. The inquiry had been down a little bit. I don't think we've really noticed a downturn in the prices we've achieved. In fact, some of the prices and the competition for the sales in the last month or 6 weeks have been quite strong, haven't they, boys?
Yeah, absolutely. There's been a number of properties that we've had multiple offers on, and sales have definitely been. If you look at the first 4 months of this year, they've been up on the first 4 months of last year, and that includes the last 2 months as well. We truly haven't seen a change yet, which has been really promising for our team.
Where's our greatest area of difficulty at the moment is probably people sitting on their hands, not making a decision. I think you'd find that around the country, Terry. The listing numbers are down a bit, but those that come on the market have got a good opportunity with a good range of buyers. Is that fair across the country?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is that there's kind of a balancing. At the end of the day, it's always about supply and demand and how that sits relative to one another. So while the number of buyers in the market generally is down, the number of listings of properties for sale is also markedly down. And in many cases, in many markets, that's balanced out. So it's putting a bit of a floor under prices. And some, the figures that came out very recently for April show that in most of our cities and most of our regional market jurisdictions, prices have held up and risen a little bit in most places during April, as they did in March. And I think that surprised a lot of people.
Yeah.
You talked about, Terry, about in one of the webinars the other day about the regional centres generally. And I mean, you've talked about how good Albury Wodonga is. What's the competition? Is it Ballarat, Bendigo, Warrnambool, and up into Queensland, or does it Albury Wodonga stand as a a stable, consistent city compared with those?
No, I think it does. I think Albury Wodonga can compete with any regional centre anywhere in Australia. As you know, we jointly produce a location report about Albury Wodonga, the market, and we start by talking about the underlying economy. I think that's such a key factor. The strategic location in terms of distance to the major cities, which means a lot of big companies have a presence there such as distribution centres, for example. The diversity of the economy, which is such a key factor, particularly at a time like this. What stands out for me is that Albury Wodonga is particularly strong in areas that are perhaps least likely to be impacted by loss of employment.
Health, education, the army, those sorts of things.
Yeah, defence forces, public administration, education, agriculture. I think it continues to be strong because supermarkets are pumping. So the businesses that supply those sorts of businesses are doing quite well. And so Albury Wodonga is very strong in important economic areas, and perhaps less dependent on tourism than other regional centres, which are going to be impacted by that factor.
Yeah, the big strong factor I think coming out of this over the next months is going to be agriculture. There's money in mud, is an old saying, and we've had some really good rain. This is the best autumn break some people have seen for 20, 30, 40 years maybe. If that continues, they all come to town and buy tractors and materials, clothing, whatever. So they're a great support for the town.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think as we come out of this period, economies that have a strong element of agriculture are going to do particularly those that are been fortunate to have rain and are no longer afflicted by drought. Also viticulture, I think when bottle stores are pumping and when we start to get back to normal and people can go to pubs and clubs and cafes and restaurants again, I think we're going to see agriculture and those areas that have wine as well as part of the economy is going to be doing very, very strongly. And the jobs will come back in those sorts of communities. And I think, again, Albury Wodonga is pretty well placed for that.
I was going to say, come back and talk about your comments about affordability of housing and yields as an investor, because there's two lots of markets here, and while we have a fairly strong first home buyers market and a changeover market, we also have a strong investment market. Rion alone, did you say you sold 50 plus houses through one buyer's agent as investors over the last, 12 months or so, 2 years, Terry? Rion, not to confuse you, sorry.
Yeah, no, over the last couple of years, I wish it was 12 months. That'd be very handy for all of us. But yeah, I've spoken to a few different buyers agents, deal with a few, particularly out of Sydney and northern New South Wales. And obviously they've clued into what you've been talking about, Terry, about the diversity and all those other factors which make it a really strong place to invest. And yeah, I would suggest that probably over half of what I do personally is more investment based. And it's been going from strength to strength as far as that goes. When I first started talking to that particular buyer's agent, we've had one property that I can think of recently we turned over twice for his client. They purchased it a couple of years ago, about $215,000, was renting at $280 at that stage. We've just recently sold it. It was about 3 years later for $245 and was getting a rent of $320 with no real improvement to the structure or anything like that. Basically, that's just on growth and what's happened in the area. So, I'm always happy to spruik those type of things with the buyers agents and investors, and this goes to show that there is, a good reason to be investing here.
Yeah, I just want to reinforce the point we just made earlier about the areas in which the local economy is strong for employment. On page 4 of our location report that we produce with you guys, points at the top 5 industries for employment in Albury. Hospitals, obviously going to be not a lot of loss of employment in that area. Supermarkets and grocery stores, number 2. Primary education is also very prominent. And then in Wodonga, Defence Force, hospitals, supermarkets, aged care, residential services, takeaway food stores. I mean, these are the top employers in the Albury Wodonga economy, and they're all areas where we're not only not seeing loss of employment, but we're actually likely to be seeing businesses actually employing more people in this period. So that's a fantastic strength that you have in your city, which underpins your property market.
There's no question about that in my mind. And I mean, you haven't mentioned in there the likes of Mars, who've been around here for 50 years and best part of 50 years, and more recently Vitasoy and those Uncle Toby's, which is just down the road at Wodonga. I mean, they're just been sensational businesses, and you can go on with those. Sadly, the one that's gone the other way is the newsprint mill. But I think when Pratt's take that over into what I gather is the cardboard business and retool that place, that again will be hiring. So there's some sensationally strong international businesses in the background as well.
Yeah. So all of that provides a fantastic underpinning for your property market, and perhaps we can turn our attention to that and talk about it in detail. Perhaps the first thing that stands out for me as an outsider looking in about the Albury Wodonga property market is just how low the vacancy rates are at the moment. Several of the postcodes are well under 1%. I mean, that's got to be one of the tightest vacancy situations anywhere in Australia, and it's very, very wonderful thing to have as an underpinning to your market, particularly as a time where people who perhaps had their investment properties in Airbnb are now putting them in the permanent rental pool. It means that your local market has the capacity to perhaps absorb that and still have a very low vacancy rate.
Mm.
Yeah, I might make mention on that one because I currently had an Airbnb and we put that to the rental market now. And I've been really surprised with the amount of inquiry we've had. Not all wonderful applicants, but still amazing to see in these times how many inquiries we're getting through for that particular property. It's really good to see.
Yeah, well, it's also quite rare around the country because we know, particularly in some of the bigger cities like Sydney, where their vacancies are already relatively high, and you've got all those properties coming into the permanent rental pool, they have a problem with higher vacancies and therefore rentals are suffering. But when your starting point Josh, in your market is postcodes where the vacancy rates are 0.5%, 0.6%, etc. I mean, it sets you up very nicely to absorb any of that and still be strong with rentals.
Yeah, that's right. It's been pretty exciting for us, the fact that we've had different opportunities to either hold it as an Airbnb, which is still going reasonably well at the moment. So we're caught between a rock and a hard place, but time will tell.
Nice way to be.
It is.
So I was going to say, Terry, before you move on, that location report that you're talking about is available on our website. We've up so that if anybody gets to listen to this down the track, then they can have a read through that there, or call us for a copy, and we can send it to them.
And I would urge anybody who is watching and listening to get a copy of that report. It makes a very strong case for why Albury Wodonga is a place that people might consider as a place to live, but also as a place to invest. And the next thing that stands out for me is just how affordable it is. There are a number of suburbs with median prices in the 200s, but most perhaps in the 300,000s, which relative to our cities, it's very attractive buying, particularly when you couple it with the rental yields that are on offer.
Yeah, I think, well, I'll quickly speak. I think North Albury median's at about 238,000 at the moment. Real might have those figures as well, and Lavington's very similar to that sort of price. And I think the interesting thing about our market is if you go out to East Albury or Faguna, you might find a median of 400,000.
Yeah.
And I think the really good opportunities, because our market's not that spread, if you know what I mean. You've got these opportunities at 250,000. Other properties are selling for 400. I think there's really good opportunity in buying into the lower end in our region with the rental returns that Rayon already mentioned before.
Yeah, at a level of affordability that you can't really access in too many parts of Australia, certainly not major regional cities with strong economies. The rental yields, looking at the list of suburbs on page 6 of the location report, where we've got all the suburbs listed with their median rental yields, and many of them are somewhere between 5 and 6%. That looks pretty attractive in times when you can borrow at an interest rate that starts with a 2 in many cases.
Does that mean that you make money on the money that you're borrowing?
Well, it certainly means that you can certainly make money. If you're buying at those prices, at those rental yields, you can certainly have the prospect of a rental property that at least pays its way, but might have some element of positive cash flow about it as well. And you can't get that at very many places in Australia, certainly not in substantial places.
That's why I've been here for over 40 years, Terry. There's not many better places to go in Australia, I can tell you.
Yeah, absolutely right. And it might be an element of your market that we could touch on a little bit, because I don't think people truly appreciate. Some people might be aware that it's a substantial regional city with a strong economy and a big presence of major firms, but also offers fantastic lifestyle in terms of what it's close to and what it has within the city itself.
There's plenty of that. I mean, as I said yesterday, I went for a bike ride and I could see the snow on Mount Bogong and on Feathertop Mountains yesterday, which is very unusual for this time of the year. Not only, and then Rutherglen's just down the road, and Beechworth have got good wineries. There's fishing and all those things on the Hume Weir. We have fantastic tennis facilities. Those sorts of cricket, turf wickets. Locally for kids and families for sport, the Lauren Jackson Sports Stadium's here, so basketball, and it brings with it great hockey facilities that brings competitions, national competitions here every year. So there's, I don't know what else, boys, there's plenty else around, I'm sure.
I think the Murray River might deserve a mention right through the heart of town.
A little bit of money water.
Yeah, I think probably most Australians have heard of that one. And yeah, it's important to mention.
Absolutely. I think probably the other thing to mention as well, and I'll probably take a slightly different view than you on this, Peter, is all those things. But myself having a young family growing up here, I look at a few different things with, the parks and the I guess the education side of things, a lot of schools, a lot of good schools, a lot of diversity in those. And there's not probably a day that goes by when the kids aren't nagging me to get out for a walk or a run or, down on the bike tracks and the parks and things. And I mean, credit should also go to the local council. They have been on top of that for a few years. And I was looking just before, and I think there's 18 to 20 new projects in the wings that are to do with sort of infrastructure in that way, with parks and rail trails and bike paths and upgrades to swimming pools and things. So, there really is, you're not bored. We're spoiled for choice a little bit.
Yeah. There's nothing that you need that you can't get in your local area, basically. And you referred to education. I mean, it's certainly a regional city that stands out in that regard, not just for primary and secondary schools, but for further education. There's a number of TAFE campuses, a campus of the University of New South Wales Rural Clinical School of Medicine, La Trobe University and Charles Sturt University both have campuses, so it's well catered for when people get beyond high school as well.
The other part of that, Terry, that I see is that Albury Wodonga, both cities have had reasonable population growth. It varies in different suburbs. I mean, the older areas of central Albury, unless it's redeveloped, it's slower. But out at Thaguna, it's been, for example, and probably Barranduda and the West Wodonga and those have been up 3 and 5% in parts.
Yeah.
I think Thaguna's been over 5% in population growth in recent times. And there's a new supermarket, and even yesterday somebody said to me, I'm told that's where there's another supermarket going in. Well, that's new to me, but that's absolutely out on a greenfield site, and that's in the plan. So there's no expectation of slowing in growth in Albury Wodonga at this point.
Well, it is definitely a growth city, and that's something that investors always look for. They want to know that if they're going to invest in an area that it is a growing area. And according to the census figures, the population of the area around the last census, 2016, was 90,000, and it's projected that within 10 or 11 years, that'll be over 120,000. So that's a strongly growing city, according to the official government projections. And it's growing. It's projected to continue doing that, and obviously that again underpins your property market very strongly.
Can I ask the question, and it leaves me a little confused at the moment. We see what's happening and the borders being closed, and we're not going to have necessarily the migration that we've had into Australia for a few years. And I was listening to your comments with Tony Abood, but I just wonder what happens if we end up with almost no immigration for a period of time. I mean, it certainly impacts the towers probably that are being built in Sydney or Melbourne and major cities rather than here. But you want to make any comment about that?
Well, I think it's a factor that will impact the biggest cities. I think it's going to impact Sydney more than anywhere else. Their population growth is very much dependent on overseas migration. They actually lose population to interstate migration, and they're dependent on those overseas migrants to keep their population growth healthy. Whereas Melbourne and Victoria gain strongly from both types of migration, both overseas and interstate. And I think it's another one of those areas where regional cities are better placed, I think, to absorb the current circumstances. And they're not so much dependent on overseas migration, but they do get migrants from other parts of the state and from other states. So I think that's probably another one of those areas that's going to stand Albury Wodonga in good stead as we move out of this period.
Yep.
So just turning back to some of the factors about your local property market, we've touched on low vacancies, we've touched on good rental yields and affordability. We're also seeing in the numbers, suburb by suburb, there's been some pretty good price growth according to some of the figures, some of the suburbs at least in terms of the median prices in the last 12 months. Is that what you're experiencing, guys, in your market?
You go around.
Yeah, I reckon that's fair to say. We've probably seen that, over the last 12 or so months in particular. The growth's been strong. We have had, or we've probably been fortunate with the growth is probably a product of a bit of supply and demand as well. With the slightly lower, listings coming on, there's been a higher demand, which has driven prices. But that being said, we're kind of like the little engine that could. I think we chug along pretty well most times. You can see what's going to happen from year to year, and it's always been pretty positive.
Yeah, I mean, when I talk to people about markets like Albury Wodonga, I often talk about safety. It's probably the sort of market that's seldom going to have a prolific boom, but you don't often see any decline in prices. As you say, it just keeps on chugging away steadily. And that presents for people who are looking for, firstly, affordability, good rental yields, but also somewhere where they can depend that their investment's going to be safe and it's just going to keep on growing steadily. Albury Wodonga appears to provide that very, very well.
My comment is that people who want to try and get in and get out and think they're going to make a quick buck, the cost to get in and the cost to get out preclude people from doing that. In other words, most people should think about their decisions generally as a longer term hold. It can happen in the share market too. That you can, if you try to get in and get out and punt the market, so to speak, that's dangerous. But I think if you've got a long-term view of your property purchase, whether it's a home or an investment, then Albury Wodonga will serve you very well.
Yeah, I think it's always sensible to take that long-term view. I never understand people who I think they call it flipping, buy something and hope that it grows in value and sell in the short period. A lot of the gains are eaten up with the costs of, selling and then buying again. Whereas the smart approach seems to be, for me, to accumulate good assets and good locations, to buy in affordable bite-sized chunks in areas like Albury Wodonga, which are affordable, have good rental yields, and then keep accumulating.
There's no question about that. If you are accumulating and the rental yields, some years ago, one of the valuation firms did an exercise looking at the returns over 20 years for Albury Wodonga and particularly Wodonga, I think at the time, and Melbourne, and over a 20-year period, despite the booms and busts of the big cities, with a more modest capital growth and a much better yield year in, year out, it was very favourable over the 20-year term in total return.
Yeah, I think it's very important to look at that total return, which takes into account both the capital growth and the rental yield. So one of the key things that we always look for at Hotspot, in fact, it is the number one thing. We have the location report that we've spoken about, and again, urge people who are watching and listening to go to the Drummond Real Estate website and get a copy of that. For me, the most important part of the report is the future prospects part, because I think that the present doesn't necessarily dictate the future for a location in real estate. So we're always interested to look at what's coming up, what's planned, what's under construction, what's approved. And it seems to me that in your area, there is just so much. There's 2 or 3 pages in the report listing the projects of various sorts of infrastructure for transport, resources and energy, commercial developments, health and medical facilities. There's just a lot going on in your area that's going to keep the level of amenities up, and also to be creating employment.
Absolutely. I mean, it's almost, in our market, there's so much of it going on, it's hard keeping in touch with it all because it's going on behind the scenes all the time.
Yeah.
There's been quite a first time now we're seeing a bit of residential, multi-storey residential development as well. I see comment about the industrial market, while right at the moment, the commercial leasing market for retail and that might be doing it a bit tough. But I think the industrial market, when you go out through the industrial estates, there's a lot of land being graded and sewers and roads going in anticipation of that growth over the next few years.
Yeah. So there seem to be, there's obviously high levels of construction of new residential dwellings, but there's also a lot Junction Place project under construction, Nexus Industrial Hub. So lots of commercial and industrial projects. New cinema and entertainment complex proposed. New offices proposed. It all adds up to a substantial amount of investment coming into the city.
I think there's about 50 major projects across just Albury City at the moment, ranging from about $100,000 to $10 million. But what I've always said to clients, and I think you guys will agree with me here, is being at the border with Albury Wodonga, the councils are always somewhat in competition with each other and almost who can outdo each side. And I know, me being on the Victorian side in Wodonga, we've seen the junction redevelopment and some really good things go ahead in Wodonga to keep up with Albury. I think it's a really nice, healthy competition that the cities have.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. That you've got this really unusual situation. You've got one city, but you're actually in two states. And I imagine that in some ways that's a pain in the butt. But as you're pointing out, actually has some advantages that help keep the place vibrant.
The boardwalk's going ahead now down on the Noriel Park. It's been on the agenda for the last 25 years, but they've cleaned the edge of the river and to put in a nice boardwalk. So I think that's trying to keep a few people in Albury as well.
They're very different cities, though. I think Wodonga's definitely gone for that more urban city feel, and they're doing a good job with that, where Albury still maintains its, as you can see behind Peter, the tree-lined streets, the river. They've both got, I suppose, their own character, which is nice to each city.
Yeah. So would you say that it's a plus in the final wash-up that help makes the overall metropolitan area strong?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah,
absolutely. They've been. I grew up basically in Wodonga, and I've had my business for the last 25, 28 years, mostly in Albury, although it was throughout the region for a while till I got smart and went back to one office. But Wodonga was for a long time a dormitory suburb of the big city of Albury, a bit like Dandenong might be to Melbourne. But I think in the last few years it's grown up, it's got its own, and they've done a lot of work on re-establishing its heart. And I think that's good for both cities. Along the way, we've ended up with, coming back to the industrial thing, like 2 rail hubs. There's the big Woolworths distribution centre, but there's stuff going on and developments going on north of Albury as well. So there is that, almost you wonder why you need 2 of them, but that's the way it is. And that's good competition, I think. Keeps both of them going.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think we've summarised the benefits of Albury Wodonga, what it offers as an economy and as a real estate market pretty well. I just thought, as we think about sort of wrapping up the discussion, Leon, if you had an outside investor considering, putting some money into Albury Wodonga, how would you sell the strengths of your city and your market to them? What are the highlights that you'd like to an investor from outside to know about?
Yeah, sure. I mean, apart from all the diversity and the economic side of it we've spoken about, the cold hard facts when you just look at the property, on its merit, there's good growth. Let's say you buy a property around $250,000, which is quite accessible here. The growth will be good. We've seen that over the years. Your returns at the moment, and probably we've seen again for a good 12 months, 6% sort of return is probably your baseline. It's not uncommon for 6.5% up towards 7% as a gross return. And taking that a step further is the opportunity or the X factor, where a lot of those properties have potential for second dwellings, subdivision, value adding, and all those things, I guess, that allow you to grow that investment as well. So it's nearly what I call a triple threat, where you've got growth, yield, and opportunity. I don't think you'll find that too many other places, and it's not, that's not a one-off. That's quite common. Every second or third property that we put to the market probably has those opportunities. So I'd probably go the other way when I talk to particularly buyers agents and say, why wouldn't you buy here?
Yeah. I'm glad you raised that last point about opportunity, because I'm aware from what we do that investors these days are looking for more than a passive investment. They don't want to just buy something and put it on the shelf and hope that it grows in value. So they're looking to value add somewhere there's an opportunity to subdivide or build a second dwelling. And it's something that we hadn't touched on in the discussion to this point. And it's a very important point, is that Albury Wodonga does offer those opportunities. And that's what investors, I think, are very much looking for at the moment.
Yeah, I would suggest nearly all the investors we speak to, the first, the initial conversation is about the block size and what's the potential for a subdivision, or particularly the granny flat type arrangement, the second dwelling, which there's a range of different opportunities there, whether it's a granny flat or an out-and-out second dwelling, and whether you subdivide or strata title or whatever. But we're quite fortunate that our meat and potato zone, if you like, where that fits price-wise, are the properties that were built back in the, say, 70s and 80s, that have the bigger blocks, that still afford that opportunity. So that fits right in our marketplace where the investors are looking. So it's quite an easy one for us. We can match up a lot of properties quite quickly to the investors and give them a few options that might suit them best, because obviously it's not a one-size-fits-all when it comes to investing.
Yeah, and the zonings and the town plan encourages that kind of activity.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say in the last handful of years, they've taken a really liberal view to it. Before that was a little tougher, but I think council again have got on board and seen the opportunity for the cities, for themselves, and what it's done after we've started seeing those developments happen. It's all been positive. So yeah, there's absolutely a lot of upside to that, and yeah, definitely council have got on board, and it's become a lot easier.
Okay.
I think it's fair to say, Terry, just coming back in history, back in the 70s, when a lot of the barrack-styled blocks of flats, and in those days it was a block of 4 flats built in Albury, 2-bedroom flats, 1 and 2-bedroom flats. The zoning didn't allow that to happen in Wodonga. So in the old parts of Wodonga, that's not quite the same. But nowadays, they're both looking at the old weatherboard houses and those that were built back in that era, in the 50s and 60s, on big blocks of land, the opportunities there, both in Albury and Wodonga, to redevelop or take opportunity with those properties.
Okay. Look, guys, we've probably covered it pretty well, so we might wrap it up pretty shortly. But I just want to finish on a particular point, one that stands out for me. Firstly, a trend that I think was already underway, and I think particularly in regional Victoria, but one I think is going to be exacerbated by the current period. And that is with technology, more and more people are sort of working from home and don't need to be in the big cities so much. And we've seen, I think part of the reason we've seen an uplift in regional markets is that factor. But this current period where people have been forced to work from home and perhaps have their eyes open to the benefits of that. Do you see Albury Wodonga benefiting from that trend, exacerbated by the forced situation with the virus shutdown that we've been through recently?
Your comment, boys, because I think you're the
I definitely do. I think Rion said it pretty well before. He's been pretty happy to raise his family here, and the lifestyle that we can afford is pretty exciting. So I think that's a good opportunity. maybe there'll be other towns, Terry, around Geelong or out of Geelong that might benefit more from that, being a bit closer to the city. But I still definitely think there'll be benefit here, particularly if you don't have reason to be in an office setup and have the ability to work from home, which is, pretty exciting. It's changing times.
I think regional centres generally are benefiting and will benefit more as we go forward from that factor. I think it's becoming a trend. Okay, guys. Well, thanks so much for your contribution. I've really enjoyed the discussion, and from my viewpoint as a researcher, but also as an investor with an eye out for opportunities all the time, I think Albury Wodonga just offers this wonderful package: a growing city, a strong and diverse economy, which is well equipped to ride out this difficult period and to go forward strongly. Incredible level of affordability where you can buy at prices that city dwellers can only dream about. Great rental yields at a time of very low vacancy rates, and that extra factor that Rion mentioned, the ability to find properties where you can do extra things, accelerate the wealth creation process by value adding in some form, such as perhaps a subdivision or building a granny flat. So what a great combination, and good luck to you going forward. I think you're well set up to do well as we exit this difficult period and move into recovery. Thanks for your contributions today.
Thanks, Terry.
Thanks, Terry.
Thanks, Terry. It's nice to catch up with you again, and I'm sure we'll do it again sometime in the foreseeable future, probably.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let's have the discussion in 6 or 12 months' time and see how it's all panned out.
Yeah.
That would be good. Thank you.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Everybody. Bye for now.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thanks, Terry.
Bye.